Are you an ambitious leader ready to break through limiting beliefs, align with your purpose, and thrive in your career without sacrificing your well-being or postponing your true desires? I'm Diana Ordonez, certified high-performance coach and your host. Each week, we'll dive into actionable insights and research-based strategies to help you unlock clarity, build unshakable confidence, and take courageous action toward a life of impact and fulfillment. If you're ready to overcome fear, embrace growth, and step boldly into your next level, you're in the right place. Let's create a life filled with courage and purpose together. Hello, everybody. I am here with Scott today, and we're going to be talking about compensation. Scott Trumpolt is pioneering and modernizing the way that we do employee compensation practices. And his view is that by modernizing the way we do employee compensation practices, that we are going to have a much more engaged employment force, that we will have better ways of meeting business needs as well as employee performance. And so Scott has been working, and I'll let you talk a little bit about your experience in a minute, but it's over 18 years just looking at different compensation planning and design across the United States and Germany. And it's so interesting that you have such incredible insights, because as we coach high performers and leaders in organizations, it's so important to really touch on compensation, because it's such a big factor in how, it's our livelihood, right? And so how engaged we are with our work, how valued we feel. And also as a leader, we want to make sure that the people that are working on our teams feel valued, are engaged, and are able to see a path to growth. So why don't you tell me about, what your experience has been, what led you here, and, what your main mission is as you do all this consulting work now, really partnering with organizations.
Sure. Well, when you speak of the 18 years, that was the corporate side, which you alluded to, I think. And what that time really did for me was to kind of assess, how is it what I do, and how can that tie in to an independent consulting career, from the idea of what's most important? Because to a lot of people, compensation is really a black box. It's a bunch of numbers that's out there. Some people don't even know that a company may have people like myself working for the organization, focusing specifically on compensation. They might think of it more as an accounting function, but it is within human resources. The reason it's within human resources is because it's not all black and white like accounting. There's gray areas. You're dealing with people's livelihoods, okay? And so after my 18 years in the corporate world, I started to think, if I went out on my own, which I've been doing for the past 12 plus years as an independent consultant, what would be the thrust? What would be the focus of what I would be doing? In other words, how can I add value in a sense that wouldn't be like in the corporate world, where I'm really in the shadows? And there are good reasons for that in some cases. But as we know, employees, there's been a gradual movement towards them wanting to see more and more transparency in how they're paid, why they're paid the way they are. And so I started to think about it when I moved into this role from the aspect of an employee engagement. When you look at human resources, there's different ways to engage the workforce. But what I wanted to do was to really focus on how employee engagement can be stimulated from a compensation standpoint. So that was my focus area. And then I had to think about, okay, who am I going to service with these ideas? And when you think about employee engagement, again, the employee, first of all, needs to be engaged. And one way to do that is to make sure they understand better, without violating any confidentiality laws, how their pay is generated. Then you've got the manager, who is really the most important person in the day-to-day life of the employee. They're the ones that are going to be able to impact employee engagement positively or negatively. But if we want the employee to go to their manager to get advice about their pay, the manager needs tools. Without tools, the manager is going to have a difficult time doing what we want them to do, which is to engage the employee. And then the third and final piece, as I look at it, is the human resources perspective. When a lot of people think of human resources, they think of, okay, they're here to do compliance programs. They're here to make sure that employees are reviewed annually for their performance and they get merit increases. If they think at all about pay, that's what they think about. But they don't think about those are more tactical aspects. So the idea is that if we can make human resources a more strategic partner, which has been the evolution of human resources over the past 20 to 25 years. But if we can get to a point where these human resources individuals are being proactive, spotting issues that might be coming up for the manager and training the manager, providing those tools to engagement, then everybody wins. The employees win, the manager wins, and human resources influence changes from a tactical to a strategic perspective. And that's where I come in.
Yeah. So you said a few things that I want to tap into a little bit. I think the first thing I want to ask for someone that has an organization or is this comment about compensation being a black box.
Mm-hmm.
So I know in the past it's actually, I don't know, when you say there's more people wanting that transparency, I do feel like there is that shift because I just, from my perspective, and maybe it's a limited perspective, when I was in the workforce, there was this message that you don't talk compensation. You don't talk about what people are making and what roles.
Right.
And so tell me about, the shift to transparency and why that's a good thing. And maybe even some background, since you've worked in compensation for so long, about why that has been that way in the past and what mindset is accompanying both approaches.
Sure. And the first thing I should say about that, that's a very good question. The first thing I should say about that is I am not advocating full transparency, posting pay ranges throughout an organization, because that often leads to a dead end for employees. Say you posted a range for an employee, and an employee, of course, knows what they're making. And they see this long range and they see they're a third of the way into the range. The first question is going to be, why am I not deeper into the range? I've been here 5 or 6 years. I'm just giving you an example. What I am advocating is the fact that it's like a freight train where a lot of states are passing laws, pay transparency laws, where they're not saying, share with every employee what every other employee is making. It's not that dramatic. It's not that extreme. That would cause a lot of issues. Hence the reason why compensation is partially in a black box. What we need to do is we need to change the dynamic about how you grow your pay within an organization. And that's where career development comes in. And what we have found is that we can link career development opportunities directly to pay. So, and then the third part of that is that there also needs to be a business need. So what I'm saying is that we change the dynamic. Instead of an employee who probably won't do this because they're self-conscious, but they won't go into a manager and say, I'm not paid enough, I'm leaving. And maybe they would, but that, again, that's a dead end. What we need to do is arm the managers with tools to say, hey, you've been with this company for 5 years. You're doing a really good job as a performer. This is what we need to see from you. We need to give, in terms of the transparency, how does the employee, because what an employee wants is they want career development and they want to grow their pay. So, for example, you institute things into the company culture. Most companies, not all, but most companies have some kind of a formal process. The only thing that employees may see right now is that once a year they go in and they have a performance review, and then they say, or they find out later on, you're getting a 3% increase. They don't really know what that's based on. maybe they know that the better performer that you are according to the internal rating system, excuse me, the more money, the more of an increase you may make. But a lot of employees will hear when they go into that meeting, well, you're paid very well against your market value. So, and you're actually above the pay range. They don't see the pay range, but they hear the word, you're above the pay range. And
Mm-hmm.
what the manager will say, because the manager, it's not their fault, but they don't have the tools
Mm-hmm.
in front of them, is to say, we're going to have to give you a lump sum payment. We can't add the pay increase, or even worse, because you're paid well above the market and you're above the range, that you're not going to be getting a pay increase. So again, engagement can be negative or positive.
Right.
But if we change the dynamic and we do it sooner than the performance review process, but even if we do it during the performance review process, when all said and done, the large bulk of that meeting needs to be about this is where you are today. Now, going forward, you have opportunities in different areas of the company, but you may have to move laterally to obtain these skills. But we have to lay out a pathway saying, right now, you're a senior professional. We have a level called specialist, and we have a level called expert that are higher. Or do you want to go into a people leadership direction? So the dynamic, just to wrap up on this, is changing it from you're getting paid too much to
Mm-hmm.
this is what we need to do to grow your value within the organization concretely, to then maybe it's a stretch assignment to gain new skills. But the idea is, hey, someone with 5 years of experience, we want to retain them, but they may have hit a dead end in their current job. So how do they grow from there? That's the dynamic that needs to be changed. And if you have tools like how to classify employees, what I call
Yeah.
career architecture, and then link it to pay and say, hey, this job over here pays more. Here's why. Here's the skills you need to get there.
Yeah. I actually come from kind of a military family. My dad was in the military. My mom worked for the military as a civilian. My brother and sister were both in the military. And as we talk about this, actually, I thought of, the governmental pay structure,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It's like you're a G9, you get paid this much, everybody knows it. And it's like, and it's so like very like transparent and like if you do
Yeah.
these trainings, now you're considered the next
Yes.
G level, whatever. Um, and it's so interesting actually as you're talking about it, because it sounds like you're saying to follow that model. And even, yeah,
Well,
well, so talk about that. Like
yes. See, the thing,
where
uh,
does that fall short?
well, the thing is that one of the things that I do as a consultant is for any tool that you put in there, you have to assess what the company culture is like and what the business mission of the organization is. So let's take the military, for example. Yes, they have I mean, the military is regimented, and I don't
Mhm.
mean that in a bad way. It's the way that they function, and quite frankly, they do a very good job at it. But keep in mind that in the military, you move up a rank, and everything you do is very transparent, and in the sense that if you move up a grade, people know exactly what they're going to be doing, what skill sets. However, and it's very, like I said, it's very restrictive. In the corporate world, in most corporate worlds, they want you to wear a lot of different hats.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a completely different environment. And so we couldn't have anything that regimented because we need to build in business flexibility to the fact that, again, the kind of things that I was talking about is what is the business need and how do we grow? Sometimes an employee may hit a dead end and find out, well, I really don't want to move in that direction. But the point is that we got to offer them a plan. That's the transparency part that's missing from the equation. And I think you can post all the pay ranges you want in the world by law and feel good about the fact that, hey, we're addressing uh,
Right,
employees' wants. And I don't think we really are. I
right.
think we're inviting more questions than answers. And if you look at the companies out there that are your top 100 companies or top 50 companies to work for, one of the things is that they score well on employee engagement, employee opinion surveys. And oftentimes that means that human resources is an active partner, a strategic partner in understanding from those employee opinion surveys what employees care about. And what do they care about? They care about their pay, but they also care a lot about career development. So if you can link those two and do it in a flexible fashion, as opposed to the military, where absolutely I have a stepson who's in the military and I've seen him grow his career. He passes this kind of test, that it's very regimented and it works and it's great for the military, but the business world is just, it's simply different. And so that the key point is to understand whatever culture I go into, and I've developed career architecture and pay structure programs for nonprofits, for small warehouses in education, as well as corporate environments, software development, all these different industries. But what they have in common is people do want to grow their careers. That's the kind of transparency they want. And that is linked to pay. That's the kind of pay transparency that I believe in. A little bit more indirect, but nevertheless.
Well, it's more empowering. I think one of the first things I do with, and what probably most coaches or all coaches do when they coach anybody that is trying to grow, is talk about vision. And a lot of times that is the very first place you have to be. Even what I like about what we are talking about with compensation is that it sounds like you want to be very strategic about the vision for the business and link that vision to your compensation practices. And
Hmm.
from the employee standpoint, it's I want to grow, but if I don't have a clear vision, it's very difficult for anybody to grow without knowing what the target is. And if you don't have this transparency of these are the evolving business needs, and this is why we're going to compensate differently for these other skills,
Mhm.
like what you're doing is you're really empowering the employee to have vision for their career. And what I love about that is that, that is what makes a great entrepreneur, is that they have a clear vision of what value they want to bring. And that brings me back to, I want to touch a little bit on your journey, since you are an entrepreneur and you have kind of structured your career in this way. It's
Mhm.
like, uh, you talked about that a little bit, like what value can I bring? Maybe um, it would be good to discuss like even how you structured your own, because sometimes even that is a challenge. Like, how do I determine my own fees? How do I determine what I'm going to
Yeah.
make now that I'm no longer employed by someone? And then
Yeah.
how do I decide if I hire what they're going to, right? It's that journey of um,
Yeah.
determining your vision and how you're going to be compensated.
Well, I had to take a really hard look when I left my last assignment at corporate, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I was overseas in Germany, which you briefly alluded to. And I knew that, first of all, engagement starts with me. I need to be engaged. And I wasn't
Hmm.
being engaged like I wanted to anymore. I was spending too much time. As you grow up the organization, the thing is oftentimes you make more money, you have more responsibility, but what happens is you end up doing more and more paperwork. You may be spending more time managing projects and tasks than doing what you really love to do, which is the design aspects. And I felt that those skills were atrophying. So I had to ask myself there was a whole bunch of questions that I wrote down, but essentially what I wanted to know was, how much competition do I have for what I do, roughly? Can my ideas travel to different countries? Can my ideas fit within any type of business? Sure, I might target companies that I was used to working in, but so I'm looking for universal themes. And what I found, and probably the reason that I've been able to sustain my consulting business and done pretty well at it, I think, for 13 years, is because those things are very much in operation. The answers were yes to those big questions. Well, the first question of all, again, was, can I be engaged? Because when I'm engaged and I feel passion for what I do, I can
Hmm.
move mountains. If you go out to my website or you look at my business card, it's not just words to me. It says uh, sustained by principle, because I have certain principles that I live by in my consultant career, but it was founded on passion, and passion is engagement. And when you have that, I mean, I find that if I can get directly in front of a CEO, sometimes I get buried in the middle management and my proposals don't get floated all the way up. But if I can get to them and I can get into a room and present to them, I'll get the job. And I don't think it's necessary. There's a lot of good analysts out there that do what I do, but I think passion is very important. You got to kind of control it. You can't be off the handle about it.
Mhm.
But I think it's very important for what you do. So that's the kind of thing that I did. I asked the questions is, can I, for the things that I want to do and I believe in, is there a market and how big is that market? Can that market sustain me for a long time? And so far, it has. There are ups and downs. You lose a client, you
Yeah.
gain a client. You have some clients that stay with you for a long time. But and I think the other thing too about the career of an entrepreneur and really about being an independent consultant, you have to be a good listener.
Hmm.
You have to, because the things that I do are universal, but they are applied differently within different organizations. So when you're scoping out a client, I think it's very important to understand, and in terms of pricing, because you asked about pricing, let me
Mhm.
tell you, if I start talking to a client and I believe that there's long-term potential to do other projects, I will price very low initially to get them interested and see success in my services. Because some companies don't really have the staff or the expertise to do what I do, but they need it. And I would rather be the slow but steady guy than trying to make one big hit and then disappear. So I look at a client. If a client's going to do a one type project and everything, maybe they get charged more. There's a lot of different factors that go into it. But if a client has limited resources and a lot of work ahead of them for the
Mhm.
goals of what they want to do, and to listen to what they want to accomplish, and then see how you can fit your tools to do that. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I love what you said. Coincidentally, I was refreshing I try to read it often as a certified high performance coach, but it's the High Performance Habits by Brendan Burchard. And there's a section of it that I was just on yesterday where he talks about, enthusiasm and passion and how that's such an indicator of whether or not you'll actually be successful at something. And it is, we talked about hiring practices and compensation. We'll touch on that a little bit in a little bit, but it is that like rather, some people get caught up in the number, right? Like I want to make this much. And
Right,
then they get into this career that makes them the money that they want. But then eventually what always happens is they become disengaged because they were doing it for the wrong reasons.
right.
And and then all of a sudden they're very unhappy, right? But it was all about like do the thing that you love, right? And the money will come. That's and
Yes.
right.
You know, I have a great example of that. I'm sorry, do you want to finish your
Oh no,
statement?
I would love to hear it.
But just from a human standpoint, many years ago, I brought on someone onto my team. I thought she was very intelligent. She had no compensation experience, but she had a lot of benefits experience. And the two were often lumped together. I don't know why, because they're totally different. But she was just a stellar employee, but a low level professional. And she wanted to learn compensation. So she came over and she did. And she got better and better at it. And then I went on and moved on my way. She stayed with the company, stayed with the company. And, these years that I've been off of my consultant, they're the vice president of human resources now. Okay.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
they deserve it because employees do have to take some responsibility, and they have to. I'm not saying that managers, and the worst thing that used to happen to me when I was a director of compensation was a manager would come into me and they say our pay ranges are no good. I've lost three top performers. I love this story. I mention it so often. I'll be brief, but I've lost three top performers in the past in the past 4 or 5 months, and I'm just sick of it. What's going wrong here and everything? And so I start to do a little bit of research, and I said, "Oh, they've been here 5 years and really good performers and everything." And I said, "What did they leave for? Do you know?" "Oh, yeah, they left for $95,000, and we were paying them like $84,000." And I said, "Guess what? 95,000. That's our midpoint of our range. That's what they should be getting paid." Now, if we had an ability to tap into the culture to be more proactive as human resource practitioners to say these are flight risks. Because there was, in other words, there was nothing wrong with our pay ranges. It's how we were managing the individual within the pay range. And of course, there are hundreds and thousands of employees, and some things slip through the cracks. But the important thing is the manager didn't have the tools, but they were drawing the wrong conclusion about our pay ranges. The pay ranges were fine. Pay ranges, think of them as a living thing. They're not just static. And we have to use the pay ranges linked to career development to move people along. You're never going to have budgets to give everybody everything they want. What you need to do is be very focused. What is the enthusiasm of the employee? What is their growth potential? On your end, managers may not know a lot about employee compensation, but they should know about what the business needs. They attend
Mhm.
meetings, they know. So help the link up the employee with the business need, with their enthusiasm, and to grow their pay. And then HR providing the tools, intermediate, tools to make that happen.
Right. Yes. What came up for me when you talked about that is, okay, sometimes the business owner is very enthusiastic about compensating their teams,
Mm.
and they, however, aren't as generous when they compensate themselves. And as a business owner, when you decided on your rates and when you decided on what you were going to pay yourself, you tie that back to compensation and your experience there. Like, what do you think is going on for that kind of leader or business owner? And how do they kind of, what's a different perspective they could take on their own?
Are you saying they're aggressive about trying to make sure their employees' pay is up, but they're not? Uh,
Yeah, like I've had um clients who, like, they're very generous, they're very, like, they have reward systems for their employees, and but they won't give themselves like a CEO salary.
oh, they might be running like an independent type firm, you mean? Or no, they're working in corporate?
They're a small business, small to medium business, but
Yeah.
they don't compensate themselves. Their salary is not a reflection of their own skills and value. It's more like they pay themselves what they need to get by.
Well, okay, all right. They may be taking the long-term perspective because let's face it, I could say I'm a CEO of my company, but I'm one person, okay? I'm also the file clerk and the guy that does the invoicing and everything else. So I'm not really a CEO, but sometimes you'll see people put CEO and president. Okay, I say I'm a managing director and I'm a consultant. That's what it is. But what it might be is if they're running a very small company, um, they wouldn't, they shouldn't put themselves in the ballpark of getting paid like a regular CEO if they have 10 employees.
Well, in
That
some
might
cases, their employees may be even making more than them when they're done
be.
with their merit increase and things like that.
Yeah. Um, I think that manager may be altruistic to a certain point, saying that the most important thing right now is to grow my company, and I need my people to do that. And so, if I do that now, and they're happy with their pay, then that means I'm going to grow my business, and I'm going to make even more money in the future. So, yes, the top leader, they do tend to think more strategic than the employee. The employee thinks more in the now, And I know it's important for all of us to live in the now and the present and everything like that. But a CEO, even of a small company, has to think more long term, strategically. And in other words, they can be more patient in some respects, I think, and forgo that. But who knows? They might have private investors who are setting up some type of a pre-stock program for them that's going to make them wealthy. I don't know all the details, but that sounds like, in that situation, that sounds like a leader who is taking the longer term, which they should as a strategic leader.
So this brings me back to if you look at your compensation model and your vision,
Yeah.
like setting the vision and being long-term strategic, what I heard was in that scenario, you it would benefit the owner to decide where those time points are. Like, what are the moments when they decide that this is when they receive that increase or they take on a higher salary? Because from a coaching perspective, it sounds like they're not valuing the value that they bring as much as the value, say, a salesperson brings because they're making the sale. And
Mhm.
so from a coaching perspective, it sounds like a limiting belief, kind of like the limiting belief that I need to do the job that pays well as opposed to the job that I would really love and have a passion for.
Yeah.
I
And,
totally didn't think this conversation would go in this direction, but I'm excited to kind of
see,
pick
it's
your brain
interesting
on
because
that.
I never, what you bring up is a very legitimate point, and it's definitely out there. And I don't want to sound like a saint or anything like that, but my mindset was never about that. The money just kept growing on it on its own. I was always focused, just laser like focused on, I wanted to be the best I could at what I did. And people took notice of that, I guess. And I just kept growing and growing. And the only reason I'm not in corporate now is because, again, I was getting to a point where, but I, th where I wasn't doing enough of what I wanted to do. And I thought I could do that on my own. And that was a gamble and a risk, but it was good. It paid off. And I think that, and I don't want to blame employees for this, but I think they do need to adopt some of that management mentality
Mhm.
of taking the longer term perspective. And to me, a great manager, you talk about the fact that they're promoting their employees and giving them more money and maybe taking less on their end and everything. Again, there's a lot of things in because remember the leader also gets a much bigger bonus usually. And so if his team performs well, they get the money on that end. So again, they're thinking a little bit more middle to long term. There's nothing sinister going on here. It's just that they know that they have, or it might be that they get a 3% budget for their department, which includes their salary. Okay. The leader's salary. And the leader may say that they want to divvy up as much as possible because a 3% merit increase to them, they can give more money if they take less, the leader to their team, because again, if the team is successful,
Yeah, they'll
uh,
be
they're,
successful.
they're successful. I mean, hire the best people. Don't be worried about competition and things like that. And actually, I didn't hire, I inherited someone on my team that I was leading that in some ways was absolutely superb in certain areas of what I did, probably was better than I was, but I had other skills on offer. Okay. But if you have limited resources, don't this is the other disconnect that we see in the market. Since we're getting onto the subject, I just want to say briefly, one of the biggest issues that I see out there is that management will sometimes want to hire someone that's very overqualified
Mm,
because they figure they won't have to do as much training with them. And the
mm,
problem with that is the recruiter will be showing resumes. Sometimes I get this, they'll involve me too. And they'll say, we can't find someone for $95,000 a year. All of our candidates that are coming in want to make 120,000. Well, guess what? The job they're offering is a manager's job that pays 95 in the market. This person's already been a director. They have a
Mm,
lot of experience. For some reason, they want to take a lower level job, but they want to keep their pay levels. But we pay by the job, at least to start. And then where the employee goes with that, that's that living range thing I was talking about. So
mm.
that's a little bit off to the side of what we were talking about. But it's important to understand when there's the job's market value, and the individual. The closer we can close that gap between what the job really requires and what the individual is bringing into it, I think the greater the employee engagement is going to be. And ultimately, that means paying people competitively, but they got to earn it. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, that for me makes me think of when we talk about hiring practices, whether you're hiring for skill or you're hiring, because I always say, yes, you want them to have some skill, but if you have multiple candidates, hire the candidate that has the values that are more closely aligned with the business, that
Mhm.
is, that has the growth mindset, that and to really interview for that more than the skill set, because somebody that is eager to learn, eager to grow, has very firm values on with integrity, anything that aligns actually with your own core values as a company, which goes back to start with vision. But hire for that, because the person that is eager to learn and grow, you can bring on and then give them,
Develop. Yeah.
yeah, that future vision and develop them to be able to do the things that you want them to do. Yes, that means you're going to do some additional training, like you talked about, bring them on and not have to do any training, and yet there'll be less headaches in the long term than the person that thinks they know everything, making a lot of money already, and just don't have that value of I'm here to learn, and more like I already know this stuff. Like,
Well, it's a matter of whenever I hired people to be on my team, I wanted someone that would really be engaged, and I felt that it's dead on arrival to have someone come in to do a lower level job than they've already
right,
done. They're too focused on their pay, and you got to treat each individual as what they are, which is an individual. But simply hiring the best candidate, meaning okay, they're all equal. You were talking about, say, you had several candidates, but this one's got a master's degree. Is a
right,
master's degree required for that job? You
right,
know, um, is this person going to feel challenged? Because you want the employee to meet you to meet you halfway. And so that's the kind of things that I look for. Enthusiasm, and any employee that talked about, and I had some come in candidates that would talk about, well, where could I go from here? Those are kind of the people that I hired. Not,
mm-hmm.
immediately they laser in and go, okay, what's the salary range and everything. I don't want to make it too black and white because compensation is anything but. There's a lot of gray areas, but understand that all of these gray areas come together, and you've got people with different levels of experience, different attitudes, different backgrounds, work experiences, and everything. But to me, that's what I really focused on, was this idea of employee engagement. Employee engagement, as I said, there are many different ways to do it. I'm simply looking at tapping into, and why am I all about employee engagement? Because the big argument against human resources, which I am part of, is that it can't impact the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not a profit center. They struggle to get funds for even their biggest initiatives. But what we have learned over at least the last decade, or it's becoming more transparent and more prevalent, is that if employee engagement levels go up, business results go up. I've seen it time and time and time again. And since human resources plays a key role in employee engagement, that's how they can impact the bottom line. And that's what I build my business on. Every project I take in, some are very basic. Can you market price this job and tell me how much we should pay and what are the factors we consider, to building big structures and career development plans linked to the pay structures. But I always stay focused on the idea is how can they use this tool within their environment uh, to promote employee engagement? Because a couple times in my consulting career, and I'll end on this note, at least this part, I've actually had clients come back and say, our employee engagement numbers went up in compensation. That's gold to me. That's
Yeah.
almost better than finishing the project or getting paid. That is pure gold. That's something I can sell because I don't mean to be business oriented, but I mean I'm working to survive too, like everybody else out there, and that's gold if I can prove it.
Yeah.
Doesn't happen all the time, but that's the goal. That's aspirational, and that's what I work towards.
Well, one of the reasons it doesn't happen all the time, which is what was a big part of my graduate degree program as an industrial organizational psychologist, is it's really hard to measure employee engagement,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
And you got to do it right. And most people aren't even measuring it. Most business, small, especially businesses, aren't measuring whether their employment force is engaged. They're just kind of like, like
Yeah,
taking the temperature very subjectively. And part of that degree program was all about like taking the right measurement tools in order to actually see, are your employees engaged or not? And you're totally right. That was a big part of what we studied in all the research is employee engagement leads to the bottom line,
yeah,
right? It's highly correlated. It's, and so when we talk about employee engagement, it is about when you, like knowing what you need, having clarity, knowing what not only is your job, but also like where I'm going and how do I get there. And so part of what we did was learning how to properly um, do a job description, like
yeah,
write a job description. And when you talked about, well, is a master's degree really needed for this? Like that was really the type of work that I feel a lot of small businesses and maybe just, yeah, because I think once you get into the large businesses, you start, hiring a lot of people that specialize in these things, as opposed to, like you said, when you start small, a lot of people are doing a lot of things, especially if it's an independent person that then grows their
yeah,
team. And so it's really identifying exactly what needs to be done in the job, line item by line item. What are their tasks and duties?
yeah,
And then to say, like, how important is this to that job, right? Is it a requirement? Is it nice to have? And to correlate each of those line items with their performance appraisal, right?
yeah.
And it's like very
Good
time
point,
consuming,
Diana. Yeah.
right?
Go ahead. Go
It's
ahead.
it's very time consuming and it's very like you have to really dedicate the time and space to sit down and think about all these things. But when you do that, it's like you said, it shouldn't be that one time a year thing. It is that check-in. Like one of the best practices in performance appraisal is that you are constantly checking in with them to the point where by the time the performance appraisal, it should never be a surprise to that employee how well
Right.
they're doing or not, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like clarity, vision, all these things are so important. When you talk about compensation and engagement, it is like what makes us like feel engaged in our work is things like meaning and things like um, you know, clarity on what I'm doing, feeling like I'm appreciated. And part of that feeling like I'm appreciated, yes, there's a lot of other things, but compensation is such a big part because, like you said, it is the number one impact on our livelihood. But other things also have impact on our livelihood, like, how much family life do I have? How
Right.
much time do I have to do the things that I love to do? And so I want to just touch on, and I feel like we're going a little bit all over the place, but I feel like we need to talk about it, is this idea that if I make more money, the this is the thought that people have, the expectation, and maybe it's true. The expectation is then that I will always be available for work. I will always be on my phone. I will always be on email. I won't have a life, and therefore I can't. I can't make more money because these are all the things that are come with that since um, it's not clear that it's a skill set problem. It's more, or you know, a skill set that I need. It's more like, no, if I make more money, that just means that I'm going to have less of a life, and therefore it impacts my livelihood, and therefore I can't. Like, has your experience been, especially working with so many different companies, on compensation correlation with lifestyle implications, things like travel and
Well,
availability, et
the
cetera.
biggest change was COVID. Uh,
Mm,
Everything changed after that. I used to travel, uh, you know, to different parts of the country, and in my consulting career, I've done projects in China and throughout the Caribbean and in Europe, and I traveled. Okay, since COVID, I haven't gone anywhere. I,
yeah.
I I've driven once because it was on my way. A couple of times I drove up to different clients and things like that. But the idea of having the immediate presence in the office and things like that, that has changed the dynamic quite a bit. And that concerns me from the aspect of what I've been talking about on this call, the interaction between the manager
Mm-hmm.
and the employee, the
Mm,
direct employee. Um, So that's the biggest change that I have seen. And so I'm still thinking through that. I found it was like, okay, COVID hit, and then afterwards we finally got back to work, but now it's like the culture has just shifted, and a lot of people are working from home, and then there's this movement to kind of put the genie back in the bottle, trying to get them back into that. But things have changed. As far as the mindset that you talked about, where people feel that well, if I'm going to make more and more money, there's going to be more and more demands on my time. And the only thing I can go back to, and it's not a solution, is I mean, I put in a lot of hours, but I don't think of it as work. Not
mm,
really. You know,
mm.
it's more like a hobby because I love what I do. So while that does not help the matter of the family balance, I don't think it's true that to make more money you have to work. I don't know. I know some people that are making the median salary in America and they're working a lot of hours.
Yeah.
So I haven't thought about that too much, really, this idea that people might say, well, to make more money, I'm going to have to give up more of my personal. That might be a generational issue
Mm,
that needs to be addressed. I'm not dismissing it. It's just that I'm not familiar with that being the generation that I am from. There's no right or wrong here, but I didn't think in those terms. But maybe people of my generation do think about that. I just came at it differently.
yeah.
Uh,
Well, there's
and I
also,
think engagement is so important. I want to make good money like everybody else, but it's not the number one concern because contentment doesn't lie in money. Doesn't
what did you say doesn't lie in money?
contentment
Contentment.
doesn't
Yeah.
lie in money. It makes a lot of. I always say to my wife, it says it makes a lot of problems go away.
Right.
It, that's
Yes.
great, but I don't think it brings true happiness. Um, I'm happier now than
Yeah.
than I was in my 20s or 30s
Yeah.
or 40s. Much happier because I'm
Yeah.
doing what I love, and that's the key.
Right. I think that's definitely a message to take away when we talk about compensation is like, stop chasing the number and chase what you're really passionate about, and then decide like what are the skills that are still needed to fill the gap to make more money. Yes, but make sure that what you're chasing is the thing that you're passionate about in it, and if it's not, then the money won't come anyway because you won't be engaged, right? Like you.
Exactly, exactly. And I think it's very important to understand going forward that the idea to have employees want to have more transparency to their pay is not a bad thing. I think it's a normal, natural reaction, but I don't think the answer is, like I said, posting a bunch of pay ranges, which is a cold, static type to link how they developed in an organization to greater pay. Change the dynamic about you're getting paid too much for the job you're doing right now. You're lucky to have this job. To how do we grow you so that you can continue to increase your pay? Because pay is important.
Yeah.
I don't, when I said, contentment doesn't lie in money, fine. But I'm not saying it doesn't matter either.
Yeah. What do you say to the company that says like that feels like, well, I can't afford to pay them anymore, and I don't see what they could do that would make the difference? Like, do you feel like that's a mindset problem or like a vision problem, or are there just times that people need to move on? Like,
Well, I mean, sometimes you will find that you're in a company or whatever that I had this experience myself that I'm no longer a really good fit because my engagement levels were going down. It's not really the company's fault.
hmm.
I came there of my own free will. I was there 8 years, that particular company, and a lot of great things happened. But in the end, I had to make a decision that was right for me. But I've had some companies. People will not, they may think I'm talking all about these very large corporations. I work with warehouses with a couple hundred employees, and I say you can't afford to pay them more for what they're doing right now. I get it. Okay.
Mhm.
You're worried about what your competitor down the street is paying them, and that's it. But what I'm saying to you is if you have someone who's been working on your warehouse floor for 10 years, why are they still doing that?
Mm.
You need to have managers in the warehouse. You need to have team leaders. Warehouse is part of logistics. What is it about them that keeps them there? If the employee's happy and fine, doing exactly what they're doing, that's one thing. But if the employee wants to grow, you are going to have to pay them more. Are you saying to me that you can't afford more for what they're doing right now? Okay.
Hmm.
What I'm saying is either flat out tell the employee there's no future here, there's no growth, or, I mean, managers are always talking about developing bench strength. If someone really knew a warehouse and had been there 10 years, I'd want to take advantage of that experience and start teaching them about other logistics areas and get them cross-trained and move them up
Hmm.
that way. Guess what? If you move them into a higher level or a management role, you're going to have to pay them more. Otherwise, they're going to be out the door. But you won't have a problem with that because that job pays more. What you're really saying is, I can't afford to pay these people anymore. But give them hope, realistic hope. And if it's not there, be honest with it. Say, this is all we need is a warehouse worker, fine. But you should build from within, I always feel. And there are people worth taking a chance on.
Yeah. Well, I think that's just an innate human drive, right? Like we want to grow. And if you take that away, then you're likely going to find yourself with a highly disengaged, going through the motions kind of employee, pretty fast.
Yeah, I can't, but I have seen just so many examples of three of the people that worked as me for me as individual contributors went on to become directors in different companies. And so that's a wonderful thing. You want to see that kind of growth. But I do not believe, because I've seen people might say, oh, yeah, but those are professionals, educated professionals. No, I've seen it in logistics firms with warehouses. I
Yeah.
mean, how many CEOs, and I think this jades their thought patterns sometimes, but a lot of CEOs started in the shipping room,
Right.
shipping, and now they're a CEO. What was it about them? Drive. Now, you can make an argument that someone who did this in the same single company for 40 years may have a jaded view on things. That's
Right.
all well and fine. But nevertheless, this kind of stuff happens, and we just need to increase the pool.
Absolutely. I would agree with that 100%. And I want to go loop back to what you said for a moment because it might be generational. Like you said, that there are certain ways of looking at um, just priorities in the job market, right? Like I feel like, well, that's because later on the work-life balance became such a priority for the generation that maybe I'm in. And so maybe it's a generational thing where certain business owners, and I hear actually a lot of bigger companies too, are starting to, and I think it depends on the leadership and what generation or perspective that they have, are trying to move away now that COVID is behind us from this remote first way of working. And I heard you say even you have some concerns because of the potential break in the relationship with their managers and visibility. And I think visibility is probably the term that's been used when I've heard it between when someone is in the office versus when someone is remote. And I I don't know. I think maybe it is a generational thing because as you're talking, I'm thinking, well, yeah, the employee that feels like they have so much work-life balance and that they have so much flexibility and they can have like a full life. They're so grateful for that they are really engaged and they want to keep
Yeah.
their job workplace happy because they're so grateful for the opportunity to have that kind of lifestyle. And on the other side, I hear the perspective that, well, there's no coffee bar conversations about, the what people are working on, so no cross division type of conversation, so people aren't in silos. And so I tie it back to compensation because it it did change the way we look at compensation because now all of a sudden you can live anywhere, right?
Right.
And work remotely, and the lifestyle just depends on, you know, whatever you want it to be, where you want to live, and tie that to your compensation. Now you could have a highly competitive compensation and live somewhere where the lifestyle is maybe not as expensive, but it's where you want to live. And
Yeah.
so like um, yeah, I want to tie back into that because it does also tie into the idea of, well, if I want to hire someone, for example, in LA or New York, there was an idea of what that compensation should be because, the lifestyle there is much higher than if now you go remote and you're hiring someone maybe like in Florida or, some more rural place where it's not a big city and you're not the cost of living is not as high. So like what are the dynamics there, and do you believe it's actually decreasing or increasing engagement to have this change in remote work?
Yeah. One of the things that you touch on is you mentioned cost of living. When we pay employees, we look at cost of labor, which is just what the market will bear in a local area. However, having said that, it's absolutely true that someone may be working remotely in Los Angeles and the company is in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Right.
Okay. And there's a big difference in cost of labor between the two. So that's something that I very much have encountered. And this is a challenge going forward with my clients. They say, should we just pay? Because what I find myself doing is I build a pay structure, for example, and then I look at all of the cities that they have employees. It might be actually facilities as well as remote employees,
Mm.
and um, figure out the cost of labor differential and create subsets of that pay structure for these different areas. So they're paying competitively based on where the individual, but a lot of it comes down to making a decision. Now, if uh, they're near a facility, you should pay based on that local market, not based on the corporate. But every company is going to look at it differently. Some will say, okay, I don't care. The office is in Salt Lake City, and we pay based on the Salt Lake City because
Mm.
we weren't really looking for someone. See, it depends on the situation. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but let's say you hired a salesperson in Los Angeles. Yeah, and the office is in Salt Lake City. Well, it would make sense to pay the salesperson because they're focusing on working for the company in the Los Angeles area. Okay.
Mhm.
So you want to pay them that market differential because you're in competition with other sales. You need someone in the LA market. But if you had another individual that, yes, the job can be done remotely, but you don't specifically care whether they live there or whatever, it may not be as big a deal with the pay. So it's kind of a case by case basis. And as far as I think the jury's out. I secretly admire the new generation or newer generations than me, I should say, in the sense that, the work-life balance is very important. And for me, career was such a big thing and such a focus. You do give up some other things.
Mm.
Fortunately, a lot of good things happen too. But I think the jury's still out. I can't make an assessment. I mean, we know now, for example, not to get political, but this whole idea of federal employees and whether they should work remotely or not, and the things that are changing there. How is that going to impact the private sector? Even though they're two different entities, So the jury's out. And what I do is keep an eye on the laws. Things are changing, like the pay transparency laws, and see how can I adapt my business to meet those needs. So the
Mhm.
jury's out. I can't give a definitive
Yeah.
one way.
Actually, you're right. Even my parents now, were facing like whether or not their, remote work hours were going to be like approved or taken away. And
Mhm.
it's like, well, like you gotta, you talk about engagement. Now that COVID's happened, it's a possibility, right? Like before, it was like, it wasn't even a thought. Like, that's just not how we operate. But now that it's happened and people are working in that space, I feel like there's no reason to change it unless real business outcomes have gone down that account for all the other variables. And so that's really hard to do, right? Like, how do you account for all the pandemic variables that would have impacted that anyway, right? But also, it's like, okay, but now that it is a possibility and so many companies are really like taking that on, I would think that how like going back is different from just how it was. Like maybe there were benefits to being in the office
Mhm.
that you hope to get back. But now that you've already experienced a change and people know it's a possibility and it's available and we were working just fine, like their feeling might be we were working just fine remotely. It's almost like a negative, it's
Yeah.
already negative as opposed to
And
going neutral. It's already starting from a negative place, I feel like.
yeah, and it isn't one. I actually had a CEO, a client of mine, who told me, at first I was against this working from home. He says, but man, have I changed my mind. He says, our results are good. And now he's totally gone the other way. At first, he was very resistant. So it depends on the
Mhm.
culture, who's running it.
Yeah.
But he told me, I wasn't even asking him about this. We were having a remote call because I offered to come down to the office, which is about an hour from my home, but I don't care. I manage my own time. I like to drive, that's no big deal. Makes me feel like a normal person again to have a commute. But he said, no, no, we'll just do a call. And during the call, he mentioned that he changed his mind completely. And now he says most things we do remotely, he's just changed
Yeah.
because the
Yeah.
bottom line was either not impacted or it actually improved. So that's going to be
Right.
one of the deciding factors.
Yeah. Well, now that the market's kind of stabilized, I think is a good time to kind of measure it. Where before there was so many variables involved that it was hard to say, did it improve, did it stay the same, or did it decrease? Because overall, it's gonna, like, businesses suffered through the pandemic no matter what. And people were going through massive amounts of like trauma and things in their families. So that will
Yeah.
all impact engagement. Um, but what you said is very powerful too, is that like they they visibly saw like that it was a benefit. And like, what downside is there when you no longer have the overhead of having to have like buildings with people,
Yeah.
people in them? You to think
Yeah.
about like costs of that. I feel like you said, compensation is a very individualized thing. I think the ability to work remotely is kind of part of that benefits thing too. It might be also a personality thing.
Mhm.
Um, but I know we're like kind of top of the hour here. We had so much
Yeah.
great
Yeah.
conversation. I love
I'm always
everything.
happy to come back.
Awesome. Yes. I think yeah, maybe we can have another conversation at a future time point too about um, you know, your entrepreneurial journey and how did you test assumptions, and when you talk about that employee taking on that mindset of what's the more almost like the business owner does for their business but for their careers, to have that ownership of, okay, what is my trajectory. It's like, if you just let growth happen to you, it doesn't, you don't get anywhere. It's more about being intentional and how do they go about doing that. I know when we spoke last, part of that was, what does that employee do that does feel like they're not making enough money? How do they approach that conversation? Um, and what is the manager, um, that leader, team leader, how do you equip them to do that well, to manage that conversation well?
Yeah, and again, I know in the time we had today, again, but there are specific tools and specific training to address these kind of concerns. But the first part is, introducing it into the culture, like I was talking about earlier, in ways that are already accepted by the company, by the employees. Like, okay, I'm going to have my performance review. I'm probably going to get an increase because I was a good performer. But changing the dynamic during that one conversation
Mm.
uh, about how you respond about someone's pay in a
Mm.
different way than you have in the past, and then gradually moving it forward. The first thing I want to do, the first is always to get company visible to what jobs are paying, different jobs at different levels, because there is no such thing as just one job. If, like I said, if you're an accountant, you might be an entry level, an intermediate, or senior. They all pay differently. And then from there, it's how can this become a force for employee engagement? And what tools does HR need to then work with management to support their employees? Just to summarize.
Yeah. So, I would love for you to kind of tell our viewers and listeners what how they can get in touch with you. Someone that is like either got compensation questions as and needs an expert kind of ear to talk it through, but also those people that are leading organizations and are listening and are thinking, wow, I really need to be more strategic about the way I compensate my workforce. And I really need to be thinking about how I grow these, like, I think the term you used was flight risks. Is that what,
Yeah.
right? And so how do they get in touch with you? How do you work with people?
Well, a lot of companies, human resources, for example, they know that which I'm speaking of. One of the big issues is again being not being a profit center, is not having maybe the funds or the budget to do some of the things that I'm talking about. I think where my value comes in, and this is based on the many, many, many clients that I work with, is I do this kind of work with a much lower overhead, significantly lower cost. And so that's really my big selling point. I'm not a big company with a lot of overhead that's going to have 5 or 6 people. You're going to get a customized, personalized service that's directly linked to your work culture and your business mission, as I come to understand it, working for them. And so this is why these things get off the ground, is because then there's a reasonable budget and a meaning. And a lot of the CEOs out there get the message too. They want HR to be more strategic. So they just need a plan laid in front of them that's fiscally responsible and makes sense to do. So that's it. But as far as contacting me, my LinkedIn page, I have a LinkedIn profile. But if you want to get to know a little bit more, you can look at my website, www.hrcompensationconsulting.com. And a little bit old-fashioned, but I'm a big believer in the Better Business Bureau. I'm a certified accredited member of the Better Business Bureau and the Better Business Bureau of Southeast Florida and the Caribbean. I'm a member of that. And I have a lot of customer testimonials out there. And this is another site that's very easy to access, and you can see an advertisement about my business and read what kind of projects I've done for other clients that might stimulate some commonalities with what usually it's an HR person that reaches out to me, but sometimes it'll be a business leader outside of HR. But I'm willing to talk to anyone.
Awesome.
And of course, I think you have my email, my direct email, and my phone number. Those are great ways to get in contact with me. Thank you for having me on, Diana.
Thank you so much, Scott. This was a great conversation. I think it's very important. It was awesome to pick your brain on some of these things. I didn't expect the conversation to go in certain directions, but it's awesome to hear your perspective. It's been very interesting to hear about all the different stories you have, working on these topics. It's just been a pleasure to have you on. And you reminded me that you live in Florida. Did you get snow this week?
No, I'm too far south, as far as I know.
That's great.
I'm way down near Fort Lauderdale. So what you're hearing about, I know it's crazy, but Florida is a very narrow state, but it's also a very long state. It takes me 6 hours almost to get out of the state. Driving Pensacola way up north. It's a little surprising, but it's possible.
There was so much snow down there. Yeah, we were just talking.
It looks very strange.
So, but you work in Florida, but you say you work with clients all over the world, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Awesome. From here to China and all points in between. A lot of work right now in the U.S., though. That seems to be my big base of operations, but I have done projects in other countries. I'm certified as a global remuneration professional. So global compensation is definitely within my sphere.
Yeah. I think that's important since now that everything is remote and now that everything kind of extends to all areas of the world, it's so important to have that global perspective. And it's great that you can offer that as well. So thank you so much, Scott.
Okay.
Until next time.
Okay. Bye-bye now.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode of Courage and Purpose. I hope today's insights inspired you to take bold action and align your life and career with what truly matters to you. If you're ready to dive deeper, I invite you to download my free Action Indicator Assessment, a powerful tool to help you uncover what's holding you back and take the next step towards clarity and confidence. Just visit www.lifeonpurpose.coach/action indicator to get started today. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who could use a little extra courage on their journey. Until next time, stay true to your purpose, lead with courage, and keep thriving. I'll see you in the next episode.